Welcome to Revenue Mavericks, the podcast where today's most iconic GTM leaders break down the mindset and the moves that defy the status quo. In each episode, operators share the playbooks they've used to change the game and deliver outsized growth. And now, here's the host of Revenue Mavericks, CEO and co-founder of Carrot, Justin Schreiber.
Welcome, everyone, to Revenue Mavericks. This is the show where we have the opportunity to talk to some of the innovators in go-to-market. I am really excited today to be joined by Navid Zolfaghari. He is the Chief Revenue Officer and also Head of Customer Success at Zapier. Along the way, he's had a storied career, several startups. He's also been instrumental in scaling companies like Metronome and Branch. Navid has a wealth of experience with respect to go-to-market and sales. Navid, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we are going to dive right in, and the traditional first question that we always lead with so that we can get to know a little bit about our guest. I'd be interested in knowing about an experience that you had pre-career that you feel has really shaped you as a professional.
Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily like one thing, but I would say something that has changed the way that I've operated in general is playing poker, believe it or not. So okay. I forget what year this was, like year 2000 or something. There was like a pivotal moment where poker became very popular and mainstream. So, I remember being in high school playing it, and I learned a lot about poker. And, it's a game of skill. It's a game of math. If you're only focused on the psychological elements of it, you won't win. If you only focus on math elements, you should do well, but pairing these two together is how you can be really successful. And in poker, there's probably the biggest thing that I learned from that is long-term thinking. So you can make the right decision in any given scenario and still lose and be wrong. And still lose. Like, it doesn't mean that you're actually wrong in making that call. It just means that variance shows up. So everything I think about right now is in the concept of just positive expected value, or most poker players say, like, plus EV plays. And it's that if you do the right thing over and over again, long term, you will win. And so I always think about that when I'm making my own decisions. I've got, as operators, we always have incomplete information. We got to make our best guess. But if we do the right things, if we think about things in the right way, and we follow like the most likely outcome of what we think it's going to get us, then we'll be profitable long term, or we'll be successful long term. And it's the same way I think about managing my team in general. So there's like, sales leaders have different sorts of philosophies that you can look at both spectrums, where you can say, hey, on this end, it's worst performing rep is going to get fired at the end of the quarter. And then you have another end, which is like, rah, we're going to keep it going. It's just only about culture. And like, we don't care about performance. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it's like, if you're doing the right things, I will run through the variance with you. Like, I know that long-term it will work. And there was a good story when I was at a company I won't mention, but there was a rep, very expensive. And he was like 40% of his number year one, 50% of his number year two. And it's kind of a question of like, what's going on? He keeps saying he's doing the right things. Yeah. And it showed up in year three. He closed a almost 8-figure deal. But if you were to go and average that out over the course of the 3 years, you're like, wow, this was an overperformer over a 3-year period. And it's because I saw all of the work day in, day out, and I was really close to that. And I'm like, this is going to pay. Whether or not it happens this quarter, next quarter, something else, I don't care. But like long term, we're going to win together. And I think that's where the opposite holds true as well. If you're not doing the right things, but you're still hitting your number, that's not good too, because you're thinking short term. And I want someone who's long term oriented. Obviously, we'd like to hit on both those dimensions, but for me, it's just like, are we doing the right things every day? That's for me personally, and how I look at it with my team.
So makes sense intellectually, but when you're actually staring at your cards, you're thinking about the amount of money that you've got on the line. It can be hard to have the level of discipline where you're sticking to your strategy. What have you done? I guess, have you made mistakes in that respect and kind of second guessed your strategy at the poker table? And what have you done to develop the discipline to stick with things when the risks get high?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Of course, in that even example that I gave you, you're going through a 2-year period with your most expensive rep. You do kind of question, like, I think it's the right thing, right? I think it's only natural that you get to that point. And, at some point, we need to redefine like what long-term even means. Is it like, oh, I think a big deal is coming in year 10 or something? So I think it's a natural part of the evolution, but the discipline portion is really, really important. So it depends on the context in terms of, the math breakdown, but, something as simplistic as like, not simplistic, but something like, in AE's performance, as someone who's been in the trench and has sold those sorts of deals, there's different things from multi-threading to how are we quantifying the impact within the given deal to how are we setting up the use cases and how are we phasing that out. You look at all these individual areas and you're like, this is holding true, that's holding true, this is holding true. And like, even if some parts of it may not be completely accurate, it's like, I know this is the right path. Let's stick with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is you've got a playbook. You know what excellence looks like. You're comparing the individual to that standard. And similarly with poker, where there is a disciplined strategy that you can follow, and if you're following that, you're on the right track. I think where people get into trouble is when they're kind of flying blind or subjectively applying criteria or inconsistently applying criteria to a given performer.
100% agree. Yeah. If you, again, going back to poker, if you don't know the math, then it's going to be difficult for you to be, positive expected value long-term.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on then and talk a little bit about inflection points. You are at the helm of an incredible company right now, and particularly at this era that we find ourselves in where AI meets orchestration. Zapier is really setting the trend. You weren't always in this seat. Can you look back across your career and identify an inflection point that really established the trajectory that landed you where you are today?
Yeah, it was probably my experience as a founder. So I started 2 different companies. The first company I did coming out of college was on the consumer side. Got a lot of really good learnings from there. From there, it's been all kind of B2B enterprise, for better or for worse. But I'll probably point back to my experiences at Pinpoint, which was the company I started coming off of Google. And in that, as a founder, you don't have a role. You are the SDR, you are the AE, you are the product leader, you are everything. And you have to connect the dots in each of these different hats that you're wearing. And a lot of times it's intraday too, right? So you're thinking about like, what could the product strategy be to, I got to go generate some pipeline to, I got a deal I got to close to, I got to go hire someone. So there's a lot of altitude shifts that happen during the day, but you've got to be able to say like, I'm doing this thing, which connects with this thing. And oh, by the way, that's going to change the trajectory of what we're doing over here. So you're always in that moment of connecting the dots. Now, fast forward to where, as a revenue leader, it's the same thing. Some revenue leaders can only think about like, how am I going to hit the number? But the reality is the only way you hit your number is by connecting all of the different pieces within the organization. So, we think about everything from talent strategy to what is the product roadmap and how does that change the way that we want to, do our go-to-market a little bit differently. All of these things are connected. And I think that's been probably the most formative thing for me is even when you're in a role, you're not in that role. You have to always think outside of the role. And that's really enabled me to be more successful, is just having a much broader vision of what needs to get done and like understanding the dependencies between things.
That notion of systems thinking is so powerful, recognizing the components, the way that they interact. I find that the powerful leaders, the ones that have the most leverage, are able to see kind of the system in its entirety and understand implications of moving this in terms of what it has over here. Yeah. And I think if you're able to, it being a startup, the scale is smaller. You can see the interconnected pieces. And to your point, you're actually an integral part of all of those components.
Yeah, it's super important. I always encourage members on my team as well. Your level doesn't exclude you from being able to do that as well. So even if you are an SDR, you should be thinking about marketing strategy. How can you leverage some of the different marketing programs in a different way? How can you take feedback from the field and change the way that we do our product messaging? Like all these things still connect, and it's there's nothing holding you back from doing that. Your job isn't only pipeline, even if you're goal out only pipeline.
One of the criteria that I typically apply to an executive as I'm evaluating whether or not they can scale, when they show up at that quarterly offsite, are they wearing the hat of their specific function, or are they able to put on the hat of the entire company and be just as adept at speaking about a function that they may not necessarily own as they are about their own. People that show up and say, I know my lane and I stay in my lane and I come into my lane, ultimately are going to hit a ceiling in terms of how far they can go.
Yeah, and those are the executive teams that I love being a part of. Very lucky here. I've been lucky really throughout a majority of my career in that respect, but, it's not, it's very often that we'll have other executives weigh in on go-to-market strategy, or I'll go weigh in on talent or brand. It's our job is to make the company successful. My job isn't only revenue. Revenue is one component.
You raise another interesting point, and I've thought about this a lot as well. You've been at large companies like Google. You've started your own companies. I've been at several large enterprises and startups as well. Interested in your opinion, are people inherently startup people or big company people, or have you seen people successfully be able to jump back and forth between the two with equal levels of aptitude and comfort?
I think about this often, and it's always part of the recruiting conversation, both from people that we want to go and look for and people that have applied. So it's not a perfect science. There's definitely an art to it, but I'll take an extreme example. Let's say someone has only been at a big company. They've been at, sorry, to answer your original question. No, I don't think you're kind of born being like one of those two folks. I think your experience has absolutely shaped that. Mm-hmm. But let's say someone has been at Google and Meta and Adobe and like all these big companies, and now they want to make a jump to a startup. I think it's really important to start to understand, like, A, what are their motivations? B, do a really big anti-sell of like, let me tell you the state of the union and like what we would be looking for you to do. I arguably overdo it in every scenario because you're testing for like the comfort in thriving ambiguity, whereas you don't have as much ambiguity in some of those different roles. And maybe areas where like, one of the questions I ask in interviews, tell me about your highlight reel at Google or at Meta. What was like the number one thing on the highlight reel? And that's where you can kind of tell, like, did they operate in that sort of founder mentality? When they didn't have to, they could just exist in that environment and still be successful. And there's things that we can do to kind of suss those things out. But I think in my opinion, it's harder to go from big company to startup than just to go from startup to big company. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think also, while I agree with you, I've seen people successfully move between the two. People have an inherent disposition that pulls them one way or another. Not to say that if you have a disposition towards a large company, you can't do a startup, but you need to be self-aware enough to know the differences in what's required and maybe be more thoughtful and deliberate about what you need to dial up explicitly or consciously that otherwise you might fall back into kind of a comfort zone. The other thing I've noticed is that if you do not successfully screen for the profile you need up front, you're going to spend way too much time trying to keep that person in the boat, trying to address issues. I think about at startups, you need somebody that is inherently resilient, can roll with the punches, loves the ambiguity, can handle the ups and downs and these massive swings, and actually gets energy off of that. And if you don't have a person that can handle that, it is really tough sledding. On the other hand, I've seen people that have that mindset that come to a big company, and within weeks, they're really frustrated because they feel like they're in a straitjacket. They can't move. They want to do things. They don't have patience. They don't have the soft hands to work with the people. Yeah. So there's no right and there's no wrong, but there are different environments that require a different operating cadence. Yeah, I totally agree. And, going back to maybe even formative experiences, I remember when I was at Google, there was something that was broken. And I was like, all right, let me just go ahead and fix it. It didn't necessarily even affect my day-to-day, but I was like, no one's doing it. I'm just going to go and do it. Mm-hmm. I remember my boss called me and they're like, hey, did you do that thing? I'm like, yeah, I did. I think you're going to be like, great job. Appreciate that. And the reply was like, you can't just go and do these sorts of things. Like, you got to make sure you have my sign off, and this actually needed my boss's sign off. And you almost like chastised for going and like operating, coloring outside of the lines. And that for me was an experience where I'm like, okay, like at least for myself, I don't operate as good in this environment of just like, go figure it out, go fix it. The levels of approvals and the slowness to this, it just didn't work for me. But that was an experience I remember where I was like, I think it's time for me to.
And the rewards and the reprimand kind of shape the way you think about things. I was at Oracle, and I went from Oracle to a small startup, and Oracle, obviously similar environment where you got thousands of people and you got process and you can't just go do things. And I had that message reinforced so many times, and I had to kind of detox when I went to the startup and realized, in this environment, like to your point, you get praised when you just go do something. And then when I went back to LinkedIn, I was like, all right, we're back in that mode where I got to check with some people. We got to coordinate this. And so again, it's an awareness thing. Where am I? How does this operate? And how can I move between the two environments?
Yeah. And again, it doesn't exclude you from being able to make those sorts of changes at companies like Google. You just have to go about it a very different way. And again, it's for some people, it's easier than others.
Yeah. All right. Last question is the secret sauce question. Can you share with us a framework, a process, an approach that you take to deliver outstanding results within the discipline of sales?
Maybe I'll give, there's a couple I can think of. One, this dates back to, did you ever work with Skip Miller?
No.
Okay. So Skip Miller was a sales trainer I had, almost 2 decades ago, and really good sales trainer, rest in peace, really built the foundation of how I operate as a seller, as a manager, as a leader. There's one concept which is absolutely not revolutionary, but it still made a difference for me, which is you call it the rule of 2X. And it's like people will always take double the amount of time that they actually need. It's just like general human behavior. Mm-hmm. So the way you want to combat that is just cut everything that you would want to do in half. So an example of this would be you're on a sales call and we're like, Justin, we had a great call. Why don't we follow up next week? That's like a common pattern that you might see. But now if I say next week, you're like, next week, we got Christmas coming up. Why don't we meet after the holidays? Now we're pushed out 2 weeks. But it's very different for us to have a call right now and say, Justin, that was a great call. It's 2:00. I think I can get to some of these things in the next hour. Do you want to touch base around 4, or do you want to touch base tomorrow morning? Now, all of a sudden, your counter to me, if you can't make that, well, why do you make it? And that's great. Or your counter is going to be like, I can't do it this week. How about early next week? So just a little thing like that shaves off a day, and those things compound over time. So I'm always thinking about like, how do we just decrease the length between, point A and point B? And there's very simple things that you can control and get there. So, fast forward to another company, I had a manager who also like reinforced this, and his whole theme, by the way, TC, if you're watching this, appreciate it. Still operating. So you got rule of 2X with Skip, and then one of my former managers, TC, he always used to joke around, there is no tomorrow. And it was kind of a homage to Rocky 3, where Rocky's training with Apollo Creed, and he's just tomorrow. He's like, there is no tomorrow. As a matter of fact, like when I left my team, there is no tomorrow. Team made me a little bobblehead, but that was kind of like the mantra I bring to the team is there is no tomorrow. Let's go ahead and push on it today. In startups specifically, urgency matters. Urgency compounds. It is very important that we move very quickly, and that to me is like the difference between winning and losing. And there's you can make up for lack of skill set by just moving a lot faster. Obviously, you want to get better at your craft every single day, but that's something that stuck with me. And like urgency is incredibly important.
Well, first of all, props for calling out Rocky 3. In my opinion, of the 12 or 15 that were made, definitely the top of the list. I love that. And I quote that all the time. There is no tomorrow. So I love that.
It's a great video. Yeah, my team's sick of seeing the YouTube clip.
If you think about it, though, one decision, it gets done in 2 days versus 4 days, maybe not a big deal. But I thought about if you treat every decision like that, and to your point, cut the time in half, over the course of a year, you've literally created a new year of work that you could do.
Yeah.
And that's really something that comes from the top, that sense of urgency and drive. I remember Andy Grove, talked about leaders operate with a sense of urgency. He did the same thing. I actually used the same tactic about 2 hours ago. I was in a meeting and we had a conversation and I said, this is great. Can you get me this by the end of the day? And they said, oh, well, actually, I was thinking about next week. And I said, okay, well, how about today? And they said, okay. and they had it to me in 2 hours.
Yeah, it works.
So it actually works. And I think that's a very simple thing a leader can do to generate that urgency. So I love that idea.
Yeah. These things compound over time, and it's not just even doing it faster, but your conversion rates go up, your deal sizes get bigger, because as soon as once you get to, when we're meeting after Christmas, I'm going to say, Justin, remind me again, what was the context? What are we talking about? You lose incredible amounts of momentum. So, there's other areas where you're really benefiting outside of the speed.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've moved from poker to escape velocity by halving the amount of time it takes to turn things around. Navid, this has been a great conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Revenue Mavericks, sponsored by Tarot. Tarot is the AI-native revenue operating system that Revenue Mavericks count on to increase forecasting precision and sales productivity. Follow Tarot on LinkedIn for new episode drops and updates. Thanks for listening.